This is the Austonian, 56 floors, 683 feet, the tallest all-residential tower west of Chicago, built for $250 million.
KXAN has discovered crews are fixing a major safety concern that's been kept quiet in the last 3 years.
The Austonian and its 56 stories of multi-million-dollar residential condos was finished in 2010. So why are construction workers back on site now?
Within 5 years of opening, cracks spread across it, and almost everyone who saw them believed the same thing. It was sinking into the ground. $13 million. 4 years to fix it. The ground had nothing to do with it. How does a tower built to last for decades start cracking within 5 years of opening? If the ground beneath it really wasn't the problem, then what was actually going wrong inside the concrete itself?
Was the cover correct in the design and then it didn't get executed?
Why did the same kind of defect keep showing up in dozens of separate places across the same building, instead of just one spot that could be patched and forgotten? And why did the people living inside the building not find out what was happening until years after the people running the building already knew? Austin has a reputation for difficult ground, and it has earned that reputation honestly. Underneath downtown hard limestone sits next to a softer layer of clay that swells when it rains and shrinks when the weather turns dry. When a building's foundation sits on both of those materials at once, one side of it can sink faster than the other side does. The structure above doesn't sink evenly along with it. It cracks trying to keep up. The way a door frame warps when a house settles unevenly into soft ground. Engineers have a name for that kind of movement: uneven settling. And in a city full of buildings anchored into that same shifting ground, it is the first explanation anyone reaches for when a tower starts to crack. This was the explanation residents settled on in those early years, and it was the one that made the most sense. It made sense for another reason too, one that had nothing to do with soil. In the middle of the 2000s, a technology boom was reshaping a city that had spent decades defining itself by live music and low-rise, slightly strange architecture rather than glass towers reaching for the sky. A skyscraper going up on Congress Avenue wasn't just another building. It was a statement about which version of Austin the city intended to become. In 2006, Benchmark Development, the American arm of a Spanish industrial conglomerate called Grupo Villamir, announced a 56-story tower to meet that exact moment. With floor-to-ceiling glass, private terraces, a wine room, a pool, a dog park on the 10th floor, and a sky lounge near the top with sweeping views over the whole city. The kind of amenity list built to be repeated in conversation more often than it would ever be used.
Panoramic views, world-class amenities, and the pulse of Austin right at your doorstep.
Units started at $500,000. The penthouse alone was listed at $14 million. Buyers who came for it were largely technology executives, attorneys, and real estate investors. Exactly the kind of people the pitch was written for. The pitch itself was not just about luxury, it was built around a superlative: the tallest all-residential tower standing anywhere between the Mississippi River and the Pacific Ocean. That superlative was the brand. Construction ran through the 2008 financial crash and finished in 2010, when the Austonian opened its doors and became exactly what it had promised to be: the tallest residential address in the city.
The tallest residential building in not only Austin, but all of Texas has officially opened to residents.
We wanted to set a standard for luxury. Think about getting on your treadmill and you're overlooking Western Austin and have a 30-mile view.
That was the plan. Here is what actually happened. The crack started small, a hairline fracture running through a wall, a door that used to close smoothly and suddenly didn't anymore. Residents blamed normal settling at first, the kind every new high-rise goes through as its materials settle. In 2014, a piece of concrete cracked loose along the edge of a balcony slab. It was patched over and treated as a one-off repair. Everyone involved, including the building's own staff, assumed the tower's famously difficult geology was finally causing the problem everyone had expected it to cause eventually. They were wrong. The cracking had nothing to do with the ground. So what was everyone missing? The real cause was sitting inside the concrete itself on the balconies. The steel reinforcing bars inside that concrete known in the industry as rebar had been installed too close to the outer edge of each slab. That gap let water reach the steel underneath. Once water reaches steel, it rusts, and rust doesn't sit still. It expands the way a rusting nail splits the wood around it. That expansion was enough to crack the concrete around it from the inside out. It was never the clay underneath the tower. The tower's main floors used a separate structural system. Post-tensioned concrete slabs with steel cables carrying the building's actual weight, and that system was never in question. The real failure was much smaller than anyone assumed, and it had nothing to do with the ground beneath the entire tower.
There's standards in the concrete industry for making sure that the reinforcement has adequate concrete cover, so as long as you follow those standards, there really shouldn't be any issues.
Years earlier, someone had decided where to place the rebar on the balconies, and that decision had everything to do with how those edges were built, and nothing to do with Central Texas soil. Then it gets worse. In July of 2015, a 6-foot slab of concrete broke completely free from a balcony edge and fell from one of the same private terraces the marketing had once sold as a defining luxury feature. It landed near the 10th floor dog park, the same amenity once listed alongside the wine room and the pool on the very same floor as part of what buyers were paying for. Close enough to a staff worker nearby that a few more feet would have made this a very different kind of story.
I'm just surprised nobody got hurt. I mean, I don't know how big the piece that fell, but I mean, that's just scary.
The Austonian's own general manager, Sean Bell, later confirmed the incident publicly. Residents who had paid between $500,000 and $3 million for a home were now living in a tower where pieces of the structure could come loose without warning, and nobody outside the building had been told. Behind closed doors, the building's management already knew. And here is the part nobody wants to answer.
More glass rains down on downtown Austin.
Crews spent the morning sweeping glass off the sidewalks surrounding the Austonian downtown after the last of a broken window on the 45th floor was knocked out.
It wasn't the tower's only sign of trouble. Before the balconies or after, a window pane had already fallen from the 45th floor in 2011, damaging a parked car below. Another fell from the 48th floor in 2016, while the balcony problem was still being handled quietly. Each incident was treated on its own, one at a time, as if the building's problems were coincidences, not a pattern. Residents eventually stopped waiting for answers and hired their own engineers. And the Austonian Condominium Association's lawsuit put the finding in 2 words: systemic and progressive. Not one bad balcony, all of them. None of that reached the public. It stayed inside closed-door negotiations until 2018, when Austin's KXAN finally reported that the whole situation had been kept quiet for 3 years. Scaffolding went up soon after, and for the first time, the view from some of the most expensive windows in the city became a construction platform, drilling and cutting on a schedule set by someone else, inside a home nobody thought they would need to renovate. That lawsuit named the developer, general contractor Balfour Beatty, concrete subcontractor Capform, and the steel installer, Dambra Steel Services, which went bankrupt the same year the concrete fell. Capform later sued the project's architect, Ziegler Cooper, claiming the balcony design had been altered during construction. Each company pointed at another, and that wasn't an accident. It's how large construction projects are built. In Texas and almost everywhere else, the developer, the contractor, and every subcontractor operate as separate entities, each with its own contract, insurance policy, and legal team. When something goes wrong, the fault gets argued over instead of assigned. Each side's lawyers drafting their own version of who did what. The system isn't built to find fault fastest. It's built so no single company answers for the full number alone. None of this is unique to the Austonian. Long before any of this, back in the early 2000s, Texas's oversight of residential construction was already weak by design. A state commission created in 2003 to referee disputes like this one was dissolved in 2009, the year before the Austonian opened, after a review found it had resolved almost none of the complaints filed with it. What was left, once the balconies started failing, was the court system, and whatever protections were written into contracts the developers' own lawyers had drafted. Nobody had to answer for the 3-year gap between knowing and telling, but someone still had to pay for it, eventually. There were in theory 2 ways to handle a defect like this. Cosmetic repair, simply patching over the visible cracks, was the cheap option. It would have solved nothing, since water would keep finding its way to the same gap in the same exposed steel, and the same cracks would keep coming back within a year or 2. The other option, the one the building actually needed, meant opening the balconies back up one at a time, exposing the rebar, correcting its placement and closing each balcony again in a 56-story tower while residents were still living in it. Work that wasn't finished until 2019, 4 years after the first slab had fallen.
Pivot Engineering determined the balconies were not built correctly, and the cost to fix what they call defective work would be in excess of $13 million.
That $13 million gap did not close itself. It came from a mix of insurance policies and legal settlements structured so that no single company ever had to write one check for the full number. The superlative that once sold the building didn't come from a famous name or a licensed brand. It came from a single fact. Tallest residential tower west of Chicago, that was the whole brand, and a brand built on a superlative only lasts as long as nobody else builds higher. Newer towers rose around it within a decade and the title quietly moved to a different address. Losing a superlative is normally just a marketing problem. For the Austonian, it happened while the building had an actual structural problem sitting underneath the marketing, which made the loss of the title almost beside the point. What has not faded, unlike the title, is the litigation history now attached to its name. A building carrying a documented defect lawsuit carries that history into every resale that follows, whether or not the cracks are still visible, and whether or not a future buyer thinks to ask. And all of it traces back to one decision. One rebar mistake cost $13 million and 4 years to fix. And it's happening again right now, less than a mile away. Across the Congress Avenue Bridge from the Austonian Tower itself sits Rainey Street, where another luxury tower, 70 Rainey, developed by Sackman Enterprises, a New York real estate firm, is the subject of a lawsuit representing roughly 160 buyers right now, over sloped floors and bowed walls. Different address, same story. Construction defects surfacing years after closing, discovered only after people had already moved in and signed their names to the mortgage. You just don't know which one is next. 56 floors of glass still stand over Congress Avenue today, still the image a developer wanted Austin to see. This was never a geology problem, though people believed it was one for years. It was a system that let a rebar placement error sit hidden inside concrete for years, then rewarded silence once that error was finally found inside a regulatory environment, with almost nobody left to answer to. Nobody who made that decision is being asked to justify it. Was this a single expensive construction mistake, the kind that could happen on any job site? Or is it exactly what happens when a legal structure is built on purpose, so nobody has to answer for what they approved? Both readings explain the facts. Only one of them explains why it took 3 full years to say any of this out loud. The project you just watched took years to fail publicly. The next one on this channel took longer and cost more. Subscribe, because by the time it makes the news, it's already too late. Comments are open. Name your city.